Welcome to the 2022 Virtual FUSRAP Open House, given by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, St. Louis District, formerly Utilized Sites Remedial Action Program, or FUSRAP, and the Environmental Branch. I'm your host, Andrea Wales. And let me share with you the ground rules. This meeting is being recorded. Please put your name in the chat so that we will know how many people attended. If you would like to be added to the FUSRAP email list, be sure to type your email address after your name. Legislators and their staff members are encouraged to identify themselves in the chat, as are people from other local, state, and federal agencies. Please turn your video off in order to preserve bandwidth and improve quality. Only the St. Louis District Commander and FUSRAP subject matter experts should have video and be unmuted. If you can't remember the name of the person who is speaking and it doesn't appear on your screen, hover over the lowest part of the speaker's screen and the speaker's name will appear. Only ask general questions in the chat. To protect your privacy, this meeting uses private chat, that is, attendee to host only. Private chat isn't viewable by all the public, so any personally identifiable information, or PII, inadvertently put in the chat will only be viewable by the host. Please note that homeowners' questions about their property will only be accepted via email through stlfusrap@usafe.army.mil. That's S as in Sierra, T as in Tango, L as in Lima, FUSRAP@usafe, that's USAC as in Charlie, E.Army.mil as in military, and will be answered sometime after this meeting. I encourage you to take a screenshot of the ground rules slide by pressing Control, Alt, Print Screen to help avoid typing in the wrong email address. That's Control, Alt, Print Screen. The health and safety of residents and workers are of the utmost concern to the FUSRAP team. FUSRAP's part in the community transition to improve public health is cleaning up radiological contaminants that exceed remediation goals established in the record of decision. However, the FUSRAP team doesn't have a medical mission. Please maintain an atmosphere of respect. And now let me go over the agenda. First, we will have a welcome from Colonel Kevin Gollinghorst, the Commander and District Engineer of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, St. Louis District. Then, FUSRAP St. Louis Sites Program Manager's report, given by the FUSRAP Program Manager, Bill Mosier. After that will be the St. Louis Downtown Site project status, also given by Mr. Mosier. Then the North St. Louis County Site project status, given by NORCO Project Manager Joanne Wade, a question and answer session, and closing remarks. Here to say a few words of welcome to you is the Commander of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, St. Louis District, Colonel Kevin Gollinghorst. Colonel? You might be having some technical difficulties.
We can see you, sir, but you might be double muted.
All right, even after all this time, how's that?
Good, sir.
Worth the wait.
Well, all right, I can see you, Phil, and I can see the slides. And Andrea, thanks for getting this set up. And you know, I know even 2 years into post-COVID, 2+ years into COVID, living here, we're still. I personally am still have to fight through every time the technology. And so thanks for joining tonight. Maybe we'll continue to still have some others dial in. Regardless, I just wanted to start with some opening comments. With the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, we military leaders in uniform have the honor of serving here in these great districts. For me here in St. Louis, the last 2 years of a 3-year command. And I will admit up front, with FUSRAP, I had heard about it, and I've learned so much from this talented professional team. And I'm really just looking forward to them being able to provide an update this evening. And I'm just want to make sure that anybody online knows that I'm committed to help make sure that we're transparent and communicating the great work that is being done to help in these areas and our assigned authorities, and with the funding, making the most efficient use of that funding to get as further along as possible and understanding the environment, taking care of the environment, improving it for St. Louis and the surrounding communities here. So again, I'm looking forward to the updates. I look forward to any questions. You know, this type of mission can get complex and very detailed, and thankfully we have a team that has a lot of expertise and attention to detail, making sure that we're doing the right thing all the time. Even when Mother Nature challenges us with recent rains and flooding, and you know, with the additional testing to make sure that we're being very thorough to understand how that affects the environment and our mission and our ongoing mission we have here near the airport, downtown, and in the region. So I do hope we've had many elected officials, community members, and representatives that can tell others. If you dialed in and you're a citizen in the area, maybe tell a neighbor, tell a family member, or what is being done to help improve the conditions. And so I could go on about this great team and the importance of this mission, but I'll kind of pause there. And, you know, Phil, look forward to you and the team giving the update tonight. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Colonel. With an overview of the formerly utilized sites remedial action program, let me introduce the FUSRAP program manager, Phil Mosier. Phil.
All right, thanks, Andrea. And echoing what the Colonel said, you know, this is definitely a great opportunity for us here on the team, on the USACE side, and everybody that supports us on the contractor side. And then we also wanted to give a shout out and thanks to all the support that we've received from the local community, entities, and property owners, local property owners that we've been working with throughout the years to try to execute this mission. I know it's been challenging for not just for us, but the community as well, and those local property owners to get through the remediation process and the time it takes for that. And we appreciate the patience and also the continued support that we've been getting throughout this mission. All right. With that, we'll go ahead and start into the program manager's report. And as we'll always continue to remind everyone is if you have any questions, make sure that you get those in the chat. Not only the chat gives a good mechanism for us to get those questions, but it also helps us record those questions so that anyone that didn't have a chance to come tonight can see that as well, can see a transcript as well as see the recording of our presentations that we're giving tonight. So, next slide. Switching over. While we're switching over here, I'll kind of just highlight, it's not just me in the room here tonight. Of course, Andrea had already introduced herself, but I have several of our subject matter experts, as well as Joanne Wade, the project manager, who will be giving the North County update. We have engineers and scientists sitting in the room available, making ourselves available to answer these questions, but also maintaining awareness of what is being said and also what is being asked by the public so that we can make sure that we can tailor our message so that we can reach all the audiences and try to answer those questions as best possible. All right, so right in front of you, you see the opening slide that I have. Of course, as mentioned, I'm Phil Mosier, the chief of the FUSRAP and environmental branch here in the St. Louis district. So all of the FUSRAP sites within the St. Louis district AOR and under the FUSRAP portion of St. Louis's responsibility fall under me. Always like to note we have the St. Louis sites. We also have a site up in Iowa that falls under the FUSRAP that we manage as well. And right in front of you, you actually see a picture present day from our entrance on one of the sides of our St. Louis airport site where we have all of our government facilities as well as our contractor facilities going into the area where we have our loadout area. And then a historical photo from what SLAPS was at one point back in the day when cleanup started, and where we're at today as far as the sources being removed and moving on to get to some point where we can remove all the residual stuff as well from that SLAPS and his Futura area. So, next slide. As we like to do anytime we have these engagements is to highlight our partners in this process. We have extensive coordination with all of the agencies on here, the EPA, Missouri DNR, ATSDR, and the Department of Energy Legacy Management. I noticed there are a few of our partner agencies that are on tonight, and we like to highlight that as far as our ability to maintain our mission and execute our mission while maintaining the highest level of awareness to our partner agencies and any of the documents that we produce, as well as their decision process as we go through and decide the areas that need remediation. Next slide. To drill down on that a little bit, I wanted to share something tonight. When we give these program managers reports, I want to highlight some specific things. Last time we had this, we highlighted some of the safety aspects that we take into account when we do our remediation. What I'm doing tonight is I wanted to just highlight some of the specific coordination that we do have with our partners and the mechanisms that we have in place to ensure that that does happen. Mentioned there already is the Federal Facilities Agreement that we have with the EPA, and also the Memorandum of Understanding that the national program has with DOE and Legacy Management. As we strive to get to a point where we are able to close out these sites and turn over any long-term management to Department of Energy, that's kind of, this portion here is maintaining that awareness of all those agencies, including the Legacy Management, as we go through the process. So when we get to that point, they're well aware of the current status of the site and can help manage that as it goes into long-term stewardship. With that, making sure that we have those clearly defined roles helps throughout that process, and also the responsibilities of each agency and their ability to manage the projects as they move on. So, next slide. As with any fiscal year, we like to highlight our achievements that we have had throughout there. So this one specifically highlights the area where we dispose of contaminated soil. So with any site, and then specifically to us and our FUSRAP sites with our FUSRAP contamination, this gives you a snapshot of where we're at today and the amount of soil, the massive amount of soil that has been shipped off-site to a licensed disposal facility. Latty Avenue and Slaps, of course, those sites are for the Slaps pretty much almost all the way complete, just a tiny little bit remaining underneath the rail spur. But the big picture here is we have over 622,000 cubic yards of contaminated material that was shipped off-site from Slaps. So the sources that source that did contaminate Coldwater Creek is gone, and now we're dealing with the residual effects. That points to the Slaps vicinity properties. So not just Coldwater Creek, but some of the aspects that caused some of the contamination around the site, and being able to identify those and remove those off. That's what's highlighted there in the Slaps vicinity properties, which Coldwater Creek is a Slaps vicinity property. And then the downtown side, of course, we always want to make sure that we talk about the St. Louis downtown site. And making sure that we highlight the massive amount of contamination that has been found, remediated, and shipped off-site there. So you see, we are over, for a program, we're over 1 million cubic yards. I would say here within the next couple of years, we'll be up to that 1.5 million mark. And then to equate that into the amount of rail cars, as any of the laypersons see any rail cars going being transported out, you see the amount of contaminated soil that fits in one side. That's quite a bit. So, and then we plan for the next fiscal years with our cubic yards for FY23 and FY24. Sorry, FY23. Next slide. The other goal we like to set for ourselves is the amount of properties that we release for beneficial use. What this means is we go in and evaluate a property and see if we need to do any remediation. And if we do remediation, we do a form of documentation afterwards, whether to make sure that we document the final status of the site, so that each individual property owner has a document in hand that specifically states that, at the end of the process. And this also helps us out when we get to the closeout phase and we are doing some sort of a site closeout report. We have those documents already in hand for a final status of each individual property, because both the St. Louis downtown site and the North County site are so massive, it helps us out in maintaining that level of awareness for each individual property when we do get to that stage. Next slide. The other thing I wanted to highlight tonight is our community involvement. You see some of the pictures there for some of the things that we do to try to maintain a level of awareness in the community commensurate with the amount of activities that we are doing. So we have a community involvement plan that we update every time we do our 5-year review to kind of line out exactly what we're trying to do to achieve that community involvement. We have our public meeting and or open house. We've been having that virtually the past couple of years, brought on by the pandemic. You know, that's always up for potential in the future. If we're able to have any face-to-face engagements, that could be on the table as well. And we have a lot of extensive coordination with individual property owners, letting them know where we're at in the process up front when we actually do go to get a right of entry. And then once we actually go in to do the sampling, letting them know the process to make sure they're fully aware of what to expect, both in the sampling aspect and afterwards when we're finished with the sampling, making sure that they are notified of the status of their property. And then once we get to a stage where we complete a final document, being able to share that information with them as well. Next slide. To continue on the theme of community and involvement, we do have a specific webpage that I encourage each one of you to go visit. There's a ton of information on there, not just for our current status of the sites, but also some really good material that a lot of the technical team here in the room with me have created over the years to try to explain certain aspects of our program to try to make it a little easier to understand, because I know it can be difficult in a lot of the technical aspects of what we deal with, and being able to try to get that information out to you guys is one of the things that we're striving for in our community involvement, so that everyone has a clear understanding and can have a hand in actually engaging with other community members and helping to teach them and point them to some of these resources that we try to put out there. And always we have our FUSRAP email for anyone to send questions to as well. So, next slide. Highlighted here is that FUSRAP email in addition to our website there, and also our phone numbers that you can contact us at, both our dedicated line out here for FUSRAP, as well as our public affairs office at the district. We do have our administrative record, both in here at our FUSRAP office and at the St. Louis Public Library, and new this year, we have our electronic reading room on our FUSRAP webpage. So the entire administrative records, and I say entire, it is a ton of documents. So everything leading up to the record of decision for the sites is available on our website for anyone to go and take a look at. And once again, remind everybody, if you have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. We'll take note of those, and we will be able to address those when we get to our question and answer time. All right, so after that, I'll go ahead and jump right into our St. Louis downtown site update. Currently, a project manager position is vacant, looking to fill that here pretty soon, so I am wearing that hat as well. Not too difficult for me because I was the St. Louis Downtown Site, or SLIDS, project manager prior to gaining the program manager role. Always like to point out the pictures here. These are some historical photos. One historical photo of the St. Louis Downtown Site looking as if you were above the Mississippi River there onto the site. And then the bottom site, a site that kind of gives you a good idea of what we deal with down at SLIDS in order to do some remediation the extensive use of sheet pile and the ability to go in and work with property owners, work with the individual features of each area to try and do some of this remediation. This is one of the bigger remediations. You can see there the Mississippi River in the background. We'll talk about in a couple of those slides as we get there some of the challenges that we're dealing with present day at the downtown site. Next slide. So a little bit of background that we always like to provide when we give these types of presentations about SLIDs and the amount of area that we cover. Mention that I may have, may not, but it's around 210 acres, 45 acres of that being the Mallinckrodt complex, and then 165 acres of the adjacent properties in and around the plant, owned by a couple different styles of private and government entities that we strive to work with to make sure that we can get in there and do, whether it's sampling or remediation throughout the life of the program. And once again, always like to mention, we appreciate all the coordination that we have been able to achieve with a lot of the property owners around the site. We really greatly appreciate it. You can see the primary contaminants of concern there: uranium, thorium, radium, arsenic, and cadmium for specific areas. And then the operable units that we have down at SLIDs, one being the accessible soils and groundwater, and the other being the inaccessible soils, Group 1 properties there for the no further action, and then the inaccessible soils Group 2 areas that we are currently still under investigation and refinement, so that we can get to a point where we ideally get to a point where we remediate as much contamination as possible as we strive to get to a point where we can close out this site as well. Next slide. All right, so overall picture of the downtown site gave the acreage in the previous slide. Now here's a pictorial that shows you where the actual site is located. You see there right next to I-70, between I-70 and the Mississippi River, and most of the site just being off Broadway there. So the highlighted area being Mallinckrodt plants and the property that are in the close to the center area of the downtown site, and then the adjacent properties around that. So we have we still have a good amount of area to remediate on the adjacent properties, and we're also working with Mallinckrodt to make sure that we can support them at any time that they want to take down any of the buildings that may have contamination underneath, that we can provide that support as they take down the building, so it's safe and effective for everybody. Go in there and do some remediation so they can put up a new building to support their business opportunities that they're presenting for themselves. Next slide. All right, so overall status of SLIDs cleanup with some newer photos here. Mentioned already in the program manager's report, over 300,000 cubic yards shipped thus far from the downtown site, and the number of properties that we're at down there, less than the SLAP's VPs because we have less areas and less properties to cover. But the pictures that you see there, some pre-design investigation sampling that is always ongoing at a lot of our sites, as well as some active remediation at some of our local properties outside of the Mallinckrodt area, and then some of the restoration that happens in accordance with that remediation. So if you weren't aware already, that's, it's not just the actual digging of the contaminated material, but we want to make sure that we take the due diligence to put the site back and replace things in kind as we found them, so that we maintain that level of cooperation with the property owners, both downtown site and in North County, moving forward. Next slide. So also some completed work, specific to this fiscal year, just under 4,000 cubic yards shipped off-site to a licensed disposal facility, and then some of the remediation that we've done. This is one of the property owners I mentioned that we've been so grateful towards as our ability to work with them. The Gunther Salt property, which is really close, just outside the Mallinckrodt plant. But there was quite a bit of extensive contamination, both outside and inside some of the salt domes that they have there underneath the surface anyway, that we're able to actually work with them, get in there and do that remediation so that we can at one point be able to release the entirety of the property with no land use controls moving forward. We also helped out at our, we call the property DT9 and the rail spurs that were there to support the property owner's rail improvement project. So we always, once again, want to strive for that continuous cooperation with the property owners, and it makes it easier for all of us. Next slide. So some more completed work there and some pictures associated with that. I mentioned the pre-design investigation sampling earlier. We have quite a few areas that we're still trying to make sure that we have sufficient amount of data on at the downtown site. So over government fiscal year 22, which is October to October, we were in and around a couple different areas, 8 different areas around there. And the other thing that we also do at the downtown site as well as the North County site is a great highlight for our program, and we call them utility support events. So if we get any correspondence or any requests from local utilities to be able to actually go in and do some type of groundbreaking around there, we want to make sure that we can provide the safety and protection for their personnel and also provide some sort of evaluation afterwards. And if there is any contaminated soil, we want to take that back to our loadout area so that we can safely dispose of it. Next slide. All right, so that was completed work. So some of the tasks that we have ahead at SLIDS are just continuing on that theme of that evaluation of the investigating some of those areas, as well as the continued mission that we have and monitoring the groundwater and providing those utility supports. And we're always striving to update and refine our schedule. Current remedy is expected to be complete in fiscal year 29. Sometimes that's depending on the difficulty at which it takes to get some of this contaminated material. I think we probably have been saying for a while that splits could be done, but you know, that's the nature of the beast sometimes with the environmental sites. Is sometimes it's difficult to make sure to really pinpoint that completion point, and then eventually the transfer to Department of Energy and Legacy Management. Some of the specific challenges, these are some older photos that we have, but it kind of gives you an idea of the tight spaces that we have to deal with for a lot of these areas for doing some of this remediation. So the previously considered inaccessible areas that are in some of these areas requires extensive coordination, extensive planning, and extensive engineering controls so that we can actually get in there and do some of that remediation. And as talked about earlier, the coordination with property owners is key. So we want to make sure that we always put that feeler out there for any property owners that are listening, is that we're here to make sure that we do our due diligence in coming in and remediating these areas and putting them back like we found them. So we want to encourage that right of entry process to be expeditious, so that we can get in there and do the sampling that we need and remediation if need be. All right, this is the last slide for the downtown site. This kind of gives a snapshot of, as I talked about, where we're at. All the green areas are completed. There's some form of document releasing the area or a final status of the area so that it can go back to the property owner. And then also always want to mention our email for you to send us emails if you have questions outside of this venue as well. So, all right. We'll turn it over to Joanne. Are you ready?
Yeah. Good evening, everyone. I'm Joanne Wade. I'm the North County Project Manager. And these pictures up here that we're first looking at are, first one is the excavation of the ball fields. The ball fields, 50 acres of that are area that we have almost completed. We're in phase 3 of that area, and we've done a lot of remediation. And this area here at phase 3 is close to Coldwater Creek. The second picture is this pictures of sampling in the creek and just showing some of the difficulties that it takes to actually sample the creek in the sediment levels. Next slide. North County sites are composed of 3 sites: the St. Louis Airport site, Leidy Avenue properties, and the St. Louis site vicinity properties. The Leidy Avenue properties consist of the HIS site and Futura, and with 10 vicinity properties located on Leidy Avenue. And the St. Louis VPs there's 148 VPs that are south of Pershaw Road. That's most of our industrial area that we call, and then north of Pershaw Road are the Coldwater Creek properties. And there's, last count, we've confirmed that there's 608 Coldwater Creek properties that we are sampling and remediating if needed. Next. The St. Louis Airport site is one of the source areas that has been completed. We've shipped off over 600,000 cubic yards of contamination, and it's adjacent to the St. Louis Airport site is Coldwater Creek, and we have remediated that area of Coldwater Creek adjacent to that property when we were completing the SLAP site. The site also has, we're still doing environmental monitoring on that site, and it also has our North County loadout facility. So, and on to the right is a picture of our loadout facility that we've increased because of the increased contamination that we've been remediating. Next slide. The Leidy Avenue Thanks. The Leidy Avenue properties are, it's our second source site that has also been completed. We've remediated over 200,000, we took over 200,000 cubic yards of material out of that property. We took out the HIS piles in 2001, and then we came back and did the in-situ remediation after that to complete all the cleanup on that property. Right now on that property, under the Futura buildings to the right, there is still contamination under those buildings, and those buildings will be put in institutional controls. So we are now preparing our documentation to put the land use controls under those buildings in the inaccessible areas, and we are preparing closeout documentation to transfer the Leidy properties over to Department of Energy Legacy Management by 2025. The St. Louis Airport site vicinity properties, we have, to date, we have so far taken out over 200,000 cubic yards and shipped them off to an out-of-state off-site licensed disposal facility. As I said before, there was over 148 VP south of Pershaw Road, and we have released 131 to date. There's 608 Coldwater Creek properties, and we have completed and released 308 Coldwater Creek properties to date. We've completed over 11.5 miles of Coldwater Creek, and we have just about a little over 2 miles to go. We're right close to the Missouri River right now. We are actively remediating in the Farmer Ball Fields, which I discussed before. It's phase 3 that's adjacent to Coldwater Creek. That's the area that has the most contamination, and we're still remediating in that area. And in 2021, we worked in conjunction with the Missouri Department of Transportation to remove inaccessible and accessible soils from the Pershaw Road prior to the road improvements. It was more than 35,000 cubic yards of contaminated material were removed and shipped to an off-site licensed disposal facility. While we were doing that remediation on Pershaw Road, MoDOT gave us the opportunity to also remediate under Highway 270 in the eastbound lane. So we were able to go there and to remove the contamination adjacent to Coldwater Creek prior to the road improvement from MoDOT. And then also on the westbound lanes, we actually went in and sampled and characterized the areas under those lanes adjacent to Coldwater Creek, but we were unable to remediate because of safety concerns with on the highway because of turnarounds on the highway, so we were unable to do that. But it will be put in land use control. The USAIDs, we're working with at this time we're working with the St. Louis County Department of Transportation to access contaminated soils, which are accessible and inaccessible, during road improvements between Eva Road and the Coldwater Creek Bridge on McDonald Boulevard. So we're going to be starting work in September of 2023, and we'll probably go through late 2024. We anticipate removing between 35 and 60,000 cubic yards of contaminated material. That's the remediation effort will benefit the county and the local community, eliminate potential exposure to the bridge contractor, and eliminate the need for land use controls along the section of McDonald Boulevard. We are also working closely with the property owners at BP 56, which that property is on Pershaw Road. We're almost finished with that property. At first, we worked with that property owner when they needed they were building a building, and we remediated for their building, and then we started going over to Coldwater Creek and trying to complete the contamination adjacent to Coldwater Creek to complete that remediation on that property. And here are some pictures of the VPs. In the top are the VP 56. On the right-hand side, they actually had to lift up some utilities in order to remediate, get all the remediation under those utilities, and they'll be essentially slowly building that up so that they'll cover those utilities up, but they had to keep them up because they couldn't to remediate under them. And that left-hand side of BP 56 just shows that where we are remediating adjacent to Coldwater Creek. And then on the far left at the bottom are these two pictures is just showing where we have been doing pre-design investigation sampling for the drilling on the railroad tracks. And so we're just identifying areas where we can actually either remediate or put land use controls where needed. At this time, we are, the USAID is currently preparing an explanation of significant difference. That would be to the North St. Louis County Record of Decision. The purpose of the ESD, it will give us the authorization to remediate and dispose of contaminated soils in areas that were formerly or currently considered inaccessible. Right now, we could work under, this way we could work under roads and rail lines and other permanent structures where we're warranted to reduce and eliminate long-term land use controls based on site-specific evaluation. We will also remove the risk up to utility and construction workers who may encounter the material during work adjacent to any inaccessible areas, and that would be under the roads or rail lines. At this time, when we have to work with inaccessible areas, we actually go in and support the people who are any utility workers who are actually working in that area, and because they're working in a contaminated area. So the best thing to do is just to remediate that, and we can eliminate any risks to those workers. And that's also, it will eliminate complications of implementing the land use controls and including the inability to control the status of the cover material, the future cost of remobilizing to remove that material, and a potential loss of knowledge of the nature and extent and location of any inaccessible material over time. So we will do a lot more remediation under our roads and rail lines once we have this completed. We've actually started doing this now because we've actually remediated under Pershaw Road, and we're going to be doing work under McDonald Boulevard to remove that contamination. Coldwater Creek is a St. Louis vicinity property. It goes from Banshee Road to the Missouri River. It's over 14 miles. It is on the EPA's national priorities list because it's adjacent to SLAPs and his properties. They are on the NPL list. The MEDAC material from SLAPs and HIS and Futura migrated via runoff from the historic flooding, which caused the contamination in Coldwater Creek. It was wind-blown and deposited from material. It was historically transported along haul routes containing the soil and sediment. They hauled contamination from SLAPs to the HIS Futura sites and open trucks, and a lot of contamination fell off and contaminated adjacent properties. USACE, right now we're performing PDI sampling in the creek corridor and within the 10-year floodplain. Coldwater Creek, the 14.2 miles, it exists as 750 acres. It's 608 properties, as I said before, and we identified areas where residual contamination remains. So we're working long and hard to try to identify all those areas. Right now, we monitor the creek and sediment twice a year in 10 locations. Evaluation of the monitoring data confirms that contamination from FUSRAP activities is not impacting the creek water or sediment. Contamination along Coldwater Creek exists in spotty areas along the creek banks and adjacent properties within the 10-year floodplain. The contamination does not pose an immediate risk to human health or the environment in its current configuration, which is below ground surface. More than 32,000 samples have been taken in approximately 11.5 miles of creek that we've sampled so far. And like I said before, only about 2.5 miles remaining. We're real close to the river. We send out letters to the property owners and business owners once we've completed sampling on their property to give them the status of the sampling results for their property, let them know if there's contamination or not on their property. And if there is, we will tell them, and we'll show them where it is and walk it over with them if possible. The creek sampling presents several difficulties, including weather, steep banks, fallen trees, thick brush, bridges, riprap, utilities. It takes a long time to actually sample the creek because of all these difficulties in getting into the creek and trying to get our samples taken. We have significant progress has been made, including we have released 308 properties along Coldwater Creek for beneficial use, and we have remediated over 18,000 cubic yards of the MEDAC contamination material from 6 residential properties in the 2 parks adjacent to the creek, to the Palm Drive properties and Saintson Park and Duchesne Park. These are just pictures of showing the difficulties in the creek, how they have to go in and actually sample it, and the steep banks that our samplers have to go up and down in order to sample the creek and take their samples and to do their investigation. We actually did the post-flood sampling after the major flood that we had on July 6th. The St. Louis FUSRAP District performed a thorough data collection exercise of the entire length of Coldwater Creek in the site boundaries. We collected more than 280 samples from the entire length of the creek, and we sampled roads and culverts, playgrounds and equipment and bike paths in order to take off any sediment or soils that were left behind, and to test to see if there was any contamination present. The results of this exercise show that there's no radiological contamination above the cleanup criteria, was redeposited in Coldwater Creek floodplain by the floodwater. So, and right now we have a report in progress that we're trying to write as fast as possible, and it will be released to the public as soon as it's completed. And the next slide is, the last slide is Janus School properties. The USAID sampled four parcels owned by Hazelwood School District in Florissant, Missouri. That's on the Janus School property. Several samples were taken on the property in the 10-year floodplain. Contamination was found in the one parcel on Coldwater Creek 386, which is 405 Janus School. The contamination was found at the bottom of the creek bank, as shown in the picture, close to the creek. It's about 500 or more feet from the school, and it's in a heavily wooded area in that area. So we did send letters to the Hazelwood School District on the status of these parcels, and in June, the USAID briefed the Hazelwood School Board regarding the status of the contamination found in Coldwater Creek, on the Coldwater Creek 386 property. And that's all I have. Just please put your questions in the chat. Thank you.
And would you please bring up the question slide? Please type only general questions in the chat box. To protect your privacy, please don't include personally identifiable information. If you have questions specific to your property, be sure to email the question and the address to stlfusrap@usafe.army.mil. That's STL, like the abbreviation for St. Louis, FUSRAP, FUSRAP@usafe.army.mil. Don't forget to type your name in the chat box. Just a reminder for those who haven't done it yet. That way we can get a count of the number of people attending, and be sure to include your email address if you would like to be added to the FUSRAP email list. I am getting the first question ready, because we have had some folks who have put some into the chat. Okay, this person received a letter February 7th this year from FUSRAP stating that preliminary results of the testing of their property show that no Manhattan Engineer District / AEC contamination was present, Atomic Energy Commission, of course. However, we're across from Coldwater Creek from Janus School in the general area, and on August 10th, KSDK television reported that on January 2022, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers informed Janus School of contamination, and he would like you to address that.
Is there a question there?
The question is,
Can you just go up on the chat so we can actually see it?
oh, it's, hang on a second.
There it is.
There it is. Right here. So that KSDK reported on January 27th, 2022.
They're directly across from Janus.
Yeah, they're concerned.
You can answer.
As far as the specific property information, we don't want to delve into that here. We definitely want to encourage people if they have a specific ask for their property, so that we can coordinate a specific response to you and you alone, that you email it to us on that. But for the most part, if you if there is if you've received a letter that says there's no contamination on your property, then your property is good. That doesn't rule out the fact of adjacent properties for sure, and that's something that we can coordinate down the line to make sure that the surrounding area is aware of that. But if you've received a letter that you don't have contamination on your property, then that is the case.
Okay. The next question. This is regarding Coldwater Creek. How many properties have been identified as contaminated that have not been released?
In North County?
Yes, Coldwater Creek area. We don't know.
Along Coldwater Creek is approximately 2 big. There's 10, there's going to be more.
Could you repeat that a little bit louder?
Along Coldwater Creek, there's approximately 40 properties contaminated.
Approximately 40 properties.
Yes, and we're still evaluating a large number of properties along the creek.
Still evaluating. Okay, a large number along the creek. So, all this is also about the Coldwater Creek area. Are there aerial photos showing the historic path of the creek and any movement of silt and so forth around the area? Are all areas where silt has been moved to be tested?
So the answer to that is yes. There are aerial photos that show the historic locations of the creek and the creek channel. We do use those for planning our investigations. We also use aerial photos to plan out locations to target historic features such as low areas, historic tributary channels, etc. And that sort of planning goes into every sampling event that we do. And the specific target that we're looking for whenever we are researching those historic features are silts and fine-grained materials that may have been left behind by historic flooding.
Okay, the next question. There's a large population that does not have access to the internet to get the administrative records. Can we get a set of those documents housed at the local library in North County? So right now they're at the downtown
Library.
We also have here at our location here at SLAPS where we have a full administrative record that is open to the public. Ideally, send us an email, let us know when you would like to come in, and we can set up if there are any of the population that would like that, to make sure that they send it to. If more than welcome to set up an appointment to come here and take a look at the administrative record and make copies as well if you need to. So.
And you can find that contact information on the FUSRAP website, which will be on the Contact Us slide, so be sure to make a screenshot of that. Okay, let's see. Oh, question, are you providing information to Dig Right on a regular basis? That's a Missouri One call.
So the direct answer to that is no, we do not provide information to Dig Right because we're not a utility. We do, however, have a utility support policy that we coordinate with all of the utility companies in the area. The purpose of that policy is so that any utility companies that have any work ongoing have a contact through us so that we can tell them if they're in an area of concern or not.
That question was put in twice.
There's more up top.
If you'll
Oh.
write down. Yeah, we went over that one. There's the second appearance of the dig right question. Okay, now, this is one is about Coldwater Creek. Who determines the levels of contamination allowed to be left behind?
We developed the administrative record starting in 1999 with all stakeholder involvement. That would include the remedial investigation, the feasibility study, and the subsequent record of decision. We had dozens of community outreach events in the early 2000s while we were actively remediating the St. Louis Airport site. So the short answer is, as far as who developed these cleanup levels, they were developed with input from the public, from the state of Missouri, the EPA, the Department of Energy, and the Army Corps of Engineers, in kind of a partnership type of process.
Okay, the data of sampling conducted thus far at Jana Elementary School showed higher than background levels of radium, thorium, and uranium in the majority of the samples of the ground level 0 to 6 inches of soil sampled by FUSRAP. Can you please explain why these findings of samples are consistently, Can you please explain why these findings of samples consistently above ground levels of radiological contaminants do not warrant further investigation and sampling to trace contamination around Jana Elementary? Shall I read this?
No, that's fine. The short answer is that just because something is above background does not mean it's above our remediation goals, and that's consistent with sites that you will find out around there that have some sort of record of decision that authorizes the fulfilling of the remedy in that regard. So just because something is above background does not necessarily mean it is a contaminated area.
Correct. But we do, part of our investigative process doesn't just stop at our remedial goals. Like there are times where we do more investigation if there are other, pathways or geological features or historic features that show above background. We consistently go back to investigate those areas further to determine if the full property meets remedial goals or not. So we do take all those things into consideration.
Considering the 1971 radiological survey of the St. Louis Airport sites report, it explains buildings built upon contaminated soil could cause a dangerous buildup of radon inside buildings and schoolrooms. Why have buildings like Jana Elementary that are in close proximity to Coldwater Creek have no on-site indoor air monitoring?
So a good representation of air monitoring is something that we do at the Futura property for sure, to make sure that any of the contamination that we know is underneath those properties is not providing enough unnecessary exposure level to the workers that are currently in that building. That is where we know that there's actually contamination underneath there, where right next to the Hazelwood interim storage site, we do that type of monitoring on that area in there. As far as the area down Coldwater Creek where Jana Elementary is, I'll go back to the original point that we made about the sources of contamination being gone, and what we're dealing with is residual contamination now, and the overwhelming fact that all of the contamination that we know of, that we have identified around Coldwater Creek, is not exposing anyone right now in its current configuration.
So that which is underground. You can also find out more about radon in the radon fact sheet, which is on the FUSRAP webpage.
And to add to that, if there were an area that were easily accessible to the public, such as St. Cyn Park or Duchesne Park, we would make those a priority for remediation, as we have stated previously. And we currently do not have any of those areas right now where we need to prioritize for remediation. That's not saying that we won't on specific areas that are some area that we could get to and prioritize for remediation. We will definitely take that into account as far as any areas that are more easily accessible than others as we get together and actually line out our remediation in Coldwater Creek in the next several years.
Next question is, what can FUSRAP do to track the indoor occurrence of radiological contamination in public spaces like Jana Elementary? If the current work pace of FUSRAP and contractors continues at current levels, when will the contamination hotspots identified in the banks of Coldwater Creek on and nearby Jana Elementary school property begin and complete remediation?
The first part of the question I can answer, full stop. There is no indoor occurrence of radiological contamination in North County, period. Zero. If you want to address those.
Right, no, where there was, we identified it and remediated, and those were areas that were right next to the HIS piles, where we're able to actually identify and remediate those areas. So as far as the, can you go back up? As far as the current pace of where we're at, I mentioned it a while back that we understand and we appreciate the coordination that we've had with individual property owners and the people affected, that the process is not quick. It isn't, but we maintain how diligent we are being with actually doing the investigation, identifying the areas, and then the process that it takes to get that data finalized, to get it validated, to get it into a report, to do the design for remediation. We're working towards that end goal for sure. Ideal situation, we could have started Coldwater Creek maybe sooner, but we've had a lot of other things going on in North County where we have, as Joanne mentioned, provided support to the county and MoDOT in some of these road improvement projects where they had to have that type of level of support from us in order to get some of that contamination. We did get, it's public knowledge that we got a sufficient amount of funding this year, additional amount of funding. So we're working to identify mechanisms that we can actually accelerate some of that work. So that's going to be coming here in the near future as far as our ability to do more with what we have. So rest assured that we're working on that.
Can you please explain the remediation steps when removing radioactive hotspots identified in the creek? What are the steps? How does that work with an active flowing body of water? What season or natural elements can impact the cleanup? How does FUSRAP prevent cleanup from causing the fine particle contamination to move in the air?
I'll try to answer that. The steps of remediation for the creek will be the same general steps that we have for remediation everywhere. The difference will be, and this is really an answer to how does that work with an active flowing body of water. That's the difference. We will do creek remediation one side at a time. And while we work on one side of the creek, we will have pump around systems that allow full flow of the creek to continue. So we will not be impacting the flow of the creek at all. I'm reading the rest. Let's see. What season or natural elements can impact the cleanup? Really, it's the same for the creek remediation as everywhere. We work all year long, all winter long. Heavy rains and lightning for safety reasons are pretty much the only elements that would keep us from working, and that won't change in the creek. How does FUSRAP prevent cleanup from causing fine particle contamination to move into the air? Very simply put, we have a zero dust policy, whether it's in the creek or anywhere else. Anytime that we're working, including sampling, there is water, it's used for dust control, and we have, again, zero dust policy. There is no dust allowed.
Covered dump trucks.
Yes.
Continuous air monitoring. We've never had a release via air or water, for that matter, from our active excavation sites. So is that those protective measures are put in place as well.
Thank you, Rodman and John. Here is another question. What are the background levels for the radium, thorium, and uranium? And what are the cleanup levels established by the 2005 Record of Decision, or ROD?
The background levels, they vary for uranium, thorium, and radium, different radioisotopes. I'll just try to keep it simple. They're approximately 2 picocuries per gram for all three. Our cleanup levels for radium-226 are 5 picocuries per gram and 14 picocuries per gram for thorium-230. And
What was that last part?
14 picocuries per gram for thorium-230.
Oh.
And 50 picocuries per gram for uranium. They're different for the St. Louis downtown site, a little bit different, but essentially the same.
Because they have a different Record of Decision.
Correct.
Okay, on to the next question, which is about Coldwater Creek. Oh, I think this has already been asked.
Yeah, that's the same question.
Okay, I think the person has been away from their desk. How many times greater are the ROD, the 2005 Record of Decision goals, than background levels for cleanup? Please explain the sum of ratios calculations, or SOR. Why is this method used versus identifying areas over background levels for remediation?
Well, I think you answered it first.
Yeah, I mean, for radium-226, it's approximately 2.5 times background. For thorium-230, approximately 7 times background, and uranium, approximately 25 times background. Why did we choose, let me explain the sum of ratios calculations. Since we have multiple contaminants of concern, we use what's called the unity rule. So you have to take into account the multiple factor to human health. You have to establish cleanup goals that take into account all of the contaminants of concern and not just one by themselves. So you essentially have to establish cleanup goals as a fraction of what they would be if they were the single contaminant of concern on site.
Can you compare the cleaning up to background levels of radioactive elements to the sum of ratios ROD goals? Why would you use one instead of the other? I know you said because there are multiple contaminants of concern.
Yeah, we have, ARAR established remedial goals that were agreed upon by all the stakeholders, including the public. Now, the difference being between cleaning up the background versus remedial goals that are higher than background, and is one more health protective of the other? Well, essentially, it would be easy to say yes, but at the end of the day, yeah, I mean, they're essentially the same. Our remedial goals are effectively the same. After we do removal operations and we verify that the sites have been cleaned up, we are essentially achieving background levels after our removal.
Can you please define ARARs?
Applicable or relevant and appropriate requirements.
What is FUSRAP doing to identify properties with contaminated soil from construction conducted from the 1950s through the 1970s? And what are they doing to test for contamination?
The answer to that is similar to the answer I gave earlier about using aerial photographs for changes in the creek channel. We do use aerial photographs throughout that time period to check for changes in the landscape, which would include going from farmland to housing. And we do take into account when a low-lying area goes from low to high, obviously from man-induced fill. And that has happened in places where areas have been built up by contractors to get houses out of the floodplain. And when that occurs in the area or the time frame of interest, essentially the years that were mentioned in the question, we do plan our sampling to sample those fill areas. We have done that. We will continue to do that. And it is an important part of our sampling planning.
Thank you, Robin. How many other communities across the United States have a similar above background level of contamination and a similar geographic area of radiological contamination spread as North St. Louis County, Missouri?
I would say if you look at any maps that are provided on any agencies out there, you can get a good feel of background levels around the nation, and they can definitely vary depending on where you're at.
There's hundreds of sites.
Thank you, Phil and John. Does FUSRAP budget cover the replacements of roads and water/sewer pipes placed or in need of replacement within the areas covered by the 2005 Record of Decision? If so, how does FUSRAP coordinate with public utilities and government to provide said funding?
So this question goes along the lines of any question about funding and our limited authority that we do have in addressing the contamination, FUSRAP contamination that has been left behind. So if we do encounter any areas that have those types of features in them, then we, as said earlier, replace those in kind. But to specifically target an area for replacement, that's not part of our mission, not part of our authority. But like I said, if we encounter that, then that will be part of our restoration process.
Thank you, Phil. I wanted to let everyone know that we have about 15 more minutes to this virtual FUSRAP open house meeting. However, we will be including closing remarks before that time. So if you have any questions, please, any general questions, please put them in the chat. And if you have a question about your own property, then please send an email message to SCL, like abbreviation for St. Louis, FUSRAP, usace.usace.army.mil. Okay. How effective is using a gamma walkover survey when the highest concentration of the contaminants of concern is alpha emitting thorium-230?
Great question. Get it a lot. And to answer this, you have to understand the decay products of thorium-230 and our multiple COCs, radium-226 being another contaminant of concern that is a daughter product of thorium-230. As radium-226 decays, it emits, it contains gamma-emitting daughter products, and the gamma walkover survey method is highly effective at identifying areas of elevated radioactive material on the surface of whatever, whether it be soil or a structure. Now, in conjunction with that, we do a very densely concentrated sampling of the subsurface soil, and we scan all of those borings 100% as well with a gamma detector, and we also survey the boring soil samples with the alpha beta probe as well. So to date, we have collected over 6 million gamma walkover measurements from McDowell Boulevard downstream down towards Highway 367. And we've identified, like I said earlier, approximately 40 properties that are contaminated. And, it's just one of the tools in our toolbox that we use to identify, residual legacy waste that could be present anywhere along the creek or anywhere in North County.
Thank you, John. This question is regarding Coldwater Creek. Since the level of RIM allowed to be left in the creek is higher than the surrounding soils, did the recent heavy rain move any of it onto areas that were already cleaned, or do they need to be cleaned again? And if whoever answers this question could please define RIM.
So I'm going to try to answer, and I'm going to assume that RIM means rad.
Radioactive impacted material?
Possibly. We'll discuss this question, assuming you mean the level of rad allowed to be left in the creek is higher than surrounding soils. Before I answer the question directly, I am going to give a little information on what the question is referring to. We have a sediment criteria that it is applied to soils or sediments in very specific parts of the creek, which is really the channel. And yes, that criteria is higher than our soils criteria. That being said, the number of samples that we have right now that would fail soil but pass sediment can be counted on about one hand. And of those very few samples, I'm going to say most are located adjacent to areas that will need remediation, and we will not go out of our way to leave 2 feet of sediment just because we can. If it's adjacent to soil that we're remediating, we would take an extra scoop and remove that. So that's a little extra information. The question, did recent heavy rains move any of it onto areas that were already cleaned, and do they need to be cleaned again? The answer is a simple no. One of the slides that Joanne went over talked about the extensive sampling endeavor that we took on after the recent heavy, big-time flooding. And as she said, all of the samples are range from non-detectable to way, way well below our remedial goals. And the overwhelming conclusion is easily made that contamination is not being migrated due to flooding of Coldwater Creek.
Thank you, Robin. I just wanted to let everybody know that we have fewer than 10 minutes left in this virtual FUSRAP open house. So if you have any questions, please type them into the chat. And if you have any questions about your property, please email them to fclfusrap@usace.army.mil. That will be on the contact us slide at the end, so you can jot it down or do a screen capture. Should we, as citizens, be getting tested medically for any effects of this contaminated soil in the nearby vicinity of the Coldwater Creek area? This person's concerned.
So, yeah, the simple answer is, we don't provide medical advice to anyone, as that is not our mission. However, I want to reiterate that the known areas of contamination along the creek are not exposing anyone. That does not preclude you from having your own conversations with your medical doctor for sure, if you are concerned. In addition to that, if you would provide us your specific property in an email, via email, we could get you an even better answer privately, as far as the areas that we know of contamination and where you are specifically located.
Thank you, Bill. How do you track inaccessible soils and or properties that do not allow rights of entry or permissions for USACE to go on property? If the property is sold, how are potential or new owners notified? Also, that's two different things.
Right, we maintain active coordination with property owners that we know that have inaccessible soils, and that is very few right now. Areas that we're actually concerned of that are going to need some sort of land use controls. And then at the end of the day, when we know of contamination on properties along Coldwater Creek, we maintain coordination with those property owners so that if they are doing anything as far as groundbreaking or improvements on their properties, that they notify us that they're doing that. And then if there is a new property owner, more than likely, if they don't notify us, we will find out, because we eventually need to get a new right of entry from that property owner. So at some point, if it is not handed over to the buying property owner, we will know who the new property owner is.
Okay. Good. Now, you also talked about potential new owners, such as people who are looking to buy a new house. What they can do is they can contact their realtor and ask the realtor to get in touch with the homeowners and ask if you could have copies of any records. That doesn't mean that they have to provide them, however. In that case, potential owners can put in a Freedom of Information Act request, and we coordinate with the Freedom of Information Act office and get an answer. Does the Corps of Engineers enforce the utility support protocol, if at all? Or how does the Corps of Engineers enforce the utility support protocol, if at all? Now, ladies and gentlemen, we are now at 7:55 p.m. There are 5 more minutes in this chat. Any questions that have been asked in this chat will be addressed when we post the video and the transcript. So we'll have updates for any unanswered questions or questions that we have to get back to you on. Are we able to answer the utility support?
Yeah, we can answer that. We don't have enforcement ability on our utility support protocol. We do have coordination with the local utility companies to make sure that they're aware of it and that they notify us if any of any upcoming areas that they're going to be going into in the soil to do any type of improvement or construction projects, but we don't have any enforcement on that, so.
I wanted to let everyone know, if anyone has joined recently, to please put your name in the chat. And if you would like to be added to the FUSRAP email list, please include your email address. Do we have time for another one at 7:56?
Yeah, that was simple.
Okay. This is about Coldwater Creek. How many residential properties have been identified for cleanup that have not been started? How many are in progress?
And the consistent answer that we will always give when it comes to residential properties is we maintain those conversations with the individual property owners themselves, the people that are affected by the contamination that is there and the remediation that's going to happen on their property. Right now, we don't have any residential areas in progress.
Thank you, Beth. Do we have, it's 7:57, do we have enough time for another one?
Sure.
Is that okay, Phil?
Yeah.
If the material doesn't pose an immediate risk to human health in its current configuration, why are homeowners told not to dig in their yards or plant a garden if contamination is suspected or found?
The answer to that question is in the question, in that it does not pose an immediate risk. So that's why people will ask that question. Well, if it doesn't pose an immediate risk, the second part of that, why are you cleaning it up? Because it is potentially accessible to the public. Yes, that's why we're here. That's why we're cleaning this stuff up. Yes, it is low level. That is a fact. However, it is potentially accessible and could provide some type of exposure to an individual that comes in contact with it. But that's the key. They do have to come in contact. That's the reason why it's not an immediate risk. And in its current configuration is not actually exposing anyone.
So to add to that, current configuration may mean 3 feet below the surface. The reason that we advise not to dig without contacting us is because the configuration would then change.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and we do not want material being moved from its current configuration to another area that will then cause more contamination. We don't want contamination to spread uncontrollably.
We are now at 7:59. I would like to turn it over to FUSRAP Program Manager Phil Mosier.
All right, so yeah, up to the hour here, we thank all of the continuous engagement from the public, and we definitely appreciate the opportunity to provide updates and answer questions from the public. And as always, feel free to reach out to us via email or call us on our line to make sure that we can answer any questions. And anything that we didn't get to, we'll do our best to try to answer those and get those on our website. With that, I will turn it over to Colonel Gollinghorse for any other closing remarks.
All right. Thanks to you, Phil, and the team. Great rundown tonight. Really appreciate the conscientious citizens and leaders in the region that are wanting to be informed and asking good questions. And look forward to the follow-up for those that couldn't make it tonight. So thank you all again, and have a good night.
Thank you, sir, and echo that. Thanks, everybody, for joining, and have a good night.